the ways in which a lot of these tools have become more accessible, but also the pitfalls around them. So please welcome back Heather Grimstead.
Good morning, everybody. Before I start, just a quick apology. Thursday afternoon, I started to lose my voice, and I woke up Friday morning, and every word was nothing but a squeak. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to talk on Monday, what am I going to do? So fortunately, it's past squeaking, but it's still a little rough, so please bear with me. So I'm with the Knot Worldwide. It's a company that celebrates life's milestones, from proposals and getting married to starting one's first home and starting a family. It has a portfolio of brands, including the Knot and Wedding Wire, which are the largest wedding marketplaces in the US. We actually have brands across 15 different countries. And my team is responsible for the consumer lifecycle marketing, so email and push, for the Wedding Wire brand, as well as our vendor communications and our global email operation. So we're in the process of standardizing email and consolidating email from all of our different countries to a team based in the US. So as an industry, we've been talking about personalization for years, like predictive analytics and AI and machine learning have really dominated the conversation. How to achieve that one personalization, which we really kind of hold up as the gold standard. But I've seen a real shift in the past few years, which is really the technology backing it. So even just a few years ago, it was really complicated and really took a lot of resources to implement true one-to-one personalization at a large scale. But today, platforms, some of the new ones are actually built on personalization. Other platforms are adding features and tools to their set to make that a lot easier. So those things are accessible to a lot more teams. So today I'm going to talk about, I'm going to share some examples kind of across 3 different approaches to personalization. So one is predictive analytics and getting to that one-to-one personalization. The others are data-driven, so kind of like first name, but just playing on some different data points to put data directly in messaging. And then also rules and logic, so really kind of coming down to segmentation. Because I think when we're talking about personalization, we do sometimes get caught up in the fancier side of it because it's fun, it's new, it's different, it's interesting, but there's still a lot of power in segmentation, and particularly now getting into micro-segmentation. So I'm going to share some examples, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're achieving it. Talking about the data, which of course is the foundation, and then talking about getting the right people in place. So this first example is a message that we send to users who have engaged with our checklist tool. So on the Wedding Wire site, we have an entire suite of tools about budget planning, about your guest list, about your seating chart. One of them is the checklist tool. So what we do is if a user has engaged with the checklist, but they haven't engaged with it for the past 21 days, then we send this message. So it's really micro-segmentation. And then the other piece of this is the checklist items in the message are actually given to us by our data science team. So they're using predictive analytics to determine the next 3 checklist items. And that's based on activities that the user has taken as well as where they are in their wedding planning cycle. And when we did this, we actually just started this message a few months ago. And we started it with a nice clean A/B split. We took a cohort where we did not send the message to them, and then of course sent the message to the other group. And we saw a 47% improvement in engagement with that checklist tool. So this is actually one in a series of messages. We're looking across our product at all the different data points we have, at all the different interactions that somebody has with the product. And it's almost kind of like cart abandonment. So, what are the interactions that people are taking with your product where there's some indication that they've stopped along that journey? And how do you get them re-engaged again? Now, one of the pitfalls with this particular approach is it is micro-segmentation. It can end up being very small groups. That's certainly one of the challenges that comes into personalization. So when we started this initiative, we actually identified all those data points, all the opportunities, and then we estimated out average monthly volume for every point. And there were some that we knew would work really well, but the volume just wasn't big enough to have a significant business impact, so we had to let those go. So pitfall number one, too much work for too little impact. So really thinking about measuring the opportunity up front. The other one, so we ran into this with this message. We work with another team on our copy. And from the email team perspective, we kind of shared some copy points that we wanted. We actually originally intended to include like the last updated in their date in the message. We're like, we know what you're doing, so let's tell you. And our copy team was concerned about it being a little bit creepy, so we had to have some conversations about where that line is. But the copy that came back originally could have spoken to anybody, any one of our users about the checklist tool. So we really had to go back to them and say, no, we need to speak to these people in a more personal way. We know they engage with the tool, and the copy has to reflect that. So really, when you're thinking about the copy, just are you being specific to the data that you have about it? Are you really playing on that? So this next message, also using predictive analytics. So this is one of the messages in our Welcome series. And we did a test. The message on the left talks about our vendor directory. It's a very general message, go find your vendors. On the message on the right, we added specific vendor listings. They were provided by our data science team. And we saw the improvement in lead conversion go up by 42%. So really huge lift, driving leads to our vendors. And just for context, when I talk about leads, I'm talking about couples requesting information from vendors. That is our primary goal for the email channel. So seeing that go up by 42% is a really big improvement for us. One of the pitfalls here is low quality recommendations. So I think sometimes we can get caught up in the buzzword, and it's predictive analytics, it must be good. But we can't rely on that. We've got to prove it, right? And there's a lot of ways that low quality can come into recommendations. So it can certainly be the algorithm. So test different algorithms, what's working better. One of the specific issues that we faced is that we initially actually didn't have enough recommendations from our data science team. So we were getting about 5 recommendations for each user in the database. But we wanted to include recommendations in more messages. I mean, when it drives the conversion rate up that much, you want to do it more, right? So we had to work with them to get a bigger list per user, because what we didn't want to do is basically serve the same recommendations again and again. So we started getting more recommendations, and then we also put in place a feedback loop. So we started returning to our data science team which recommendations a user had been served and whether or not they had opened the email with those recommendations. And now the data science team takes that information into consideration to modify their recommendations for that. This message is actually one of my favorites. It's our monthly countdown. We've actually had it for a long time, but we revamped it a couple of months ago. At the top of the message, we're just using direct data. So we're feeding back to people. We call this our dashboard. What is the last category they searched for? How many vendors have they contacted? How many vendors have they booked? We're also using weeks to wedding information, so we know the wedding date for everybody. And we're dropping in editorial based on that wedding date. We're also pulling in recent forum posts. We're pulling in those same vendor listing recommendations provided by the data science team. And we're also using regional information to pull in what's called a real wedding. So it's just a gallery of photos around a real wedding in the user's region. So this definitely led to a more personalized message, more up to date, since we always have like the recent forum posts and things of that nature. But really the real win here was operational efficiency. So the entire message is dynamic. When you look at this message in the system, it's pretty ugly. It's nothing but script. And what that allowed us to do is this was originally a series of 12 messages. And the email specialist who built this message actually took it from 12 to 17 in a matter of about 2 weeks. So we were actually capturing a much larger portion of our audience, and we were able to increase leads from this particular series by about 25%. Not only that, given another couple of weeks, she was actually able to take the entire 17 message series and roll it out to 3 more countries. And it was possible to move that quickly up at the end because she had put in the work up front. It was all dynamic, it's all based on the data, and we had that data structure in place for all those countries. So it's really just operational efficiency and a win there just in terms of speed and agility. One of the challenges with this message, and this is one that we're still working on, is in the top, that dashboard piece, we're feeding back to users their specific activity. If a user is not interacting with us, then that data isn't going to update over time. So that's something that we have to take into consideration and account for. We don't want to show them the same information again and again. So that's when we need to figure out when is that data point no longer useful and when do we take it out of the message. So dynamic data over time, one of the pitfalls. So as your data is changing, as time changes, as user changes, are you keeping that in mind and adjusting your message to account for that? So this particular message, we call it our vendor category series. One of our goals is to get users to submit leads to multiple categories. So let's see. From primarily a couple of different categories. And so we're trying to get them to go into those other categories. So to build awareness, make sure they're aware of it, and then request those leads. And we actually send this message to two different groups. So the first one is people who have searched for that specific category. So this is the wedding cake message. So if they've searched for bakers, then we send out this message the following week. Our second group is actually based on weeks to wedding. The performance on that particular message is a lot lower because it's not based on that user-specific activity. But the important piece here is that we don't have all the information we want on every single user. And we still have to address people who are less active. Because for most companies, certainly for ours, it's too big of a segment of our group to ignore. So we have to figure out ways to take whatever data we do know and send to them. And this is a message that we're playing with right now. We're playing with when to send the message. We're also playing with sending like multiple categories at once to see if we can get somebody to engage so that we can then bounce off of the click. But don't ignore your dormant users. There is opportunity there. So the pitfall, only talking to the converted. So what is your plan for talking to the people who are less active, the ones who have a bit less data? The second challenge with this particular message is that when a user signs up for the Wedding Wire site, we require them to put in a wedding date. Super useful from the email perspective. We base a lot of messages on that date. The issue is that when people sign up, they may not even be engaged yet. They may just know that they're getting married next year. Maybe they just know that they're getting married in the fall. So a lot of times the wedding date we get actually isn't a very reliable data point. So we do use it a lot. It's the date that we have. But we have to do so knowing that there's a good chance that it's not actually right for that user. And we're working on finding better ways to sense when that date is different. So looking for cues in the user's activity to know that we need to adjust our messaging to a different date than what they've provided. So pitfall is relying on unreliable data, and I think the important thing there is understanding when it's unreliable. So I'm going to keep talking about dormant users for a minute. So we're actually spending a lot of time really around getting to personalized frequency. And right now we're focused particularly on that dormant segment and trying to understand when shouldn't we send them the messages and which messages might they respond to. And the reasons we want to do this, some conversations in the company have been like, well, just send it to them. You'll get something out of it. So we've had conversations about deliverability and what that does for deliverability. We also want to waste money on the volume to dormant. It is inexpensive. That's not a primary factor for us, but it is something we want to keep in mind. That's a large group for you. It can certainly add up to a significant business expense. And really, the one that I think is most important is want to see if there's an opportunity to actually re-engage dormant users. So we have a pretty high frequency. For our active users, we are sending 15 to 20 messages per month. So we want to understand, like for those dormant users, if we back off of that, are they more likely to get engaged? So we're using the predictive intelligence feature within our platform. It assigns an engagement persona to our audience. So we have our loyalists who have a high open and a high click-through rate, our selective shoppers who have a low open but high click rate, window shoppers with a high open and low click, and our dormant users with a low open and a low click. So our dormant users is what we were focused on for this particular project. So we started suppressing them from this particular message goes 2 weeks before a wedding. It provides editorial content around what not to pack on your honeymoon. And what we found is when we started suppressing the dormant users, the click-through rate went up by 70%. This sounds really good. It's a big improvement, right? The issue with that is our click volume went down by 14%. So for this particular message, that was actually fine. It was not one of our primary goals. But I can tell you, if we saw a 14% drop in leads from a message, it would be a really big issue. So I think one of the pitfalls is actually too much focus on open and click rate. So the thing to keep in mind here is for us, we actually have quite a good inbox placement rate. We're sitting at 97 to 98%. So we didn't have a problem there that we were trying to solve. We weren't concerned about the budget. What we don't know yet, because we haven't done enough testing, is whether or not backing off that frequency will get those dormant users to re-engage. But with this in mind, when it comes to our messages that are driving leads, we're not going to take a 14% drop in leads in order to get that increase in click-through rate. So this particular message, also based on rules and logic, really easy to implement. There's nothing fancy about it. This is promoting our wedding website, so couples can create their own website to talk about their event and the venue and show their registry. And it's going to 2 sets of users. We're sending it to users who have clicked on a link about wedding websites in a previous message, but haven't set up their website. And then we're also sending it to users who have told us that they've booked their venue. So once somebody's booked their venue, the location's down, the data's set, it's time for them to start sending their save the date messages, start pulling together their invitations, and it's time for them to start building their wedding website. So really narrowing down on that timing. And this message is really similar. This is our one of our registry messages. The way the registry works is that users go to their retailer, so it might be Target or Wayfair or Amazon. And once they've started their registry, they can actually import it into their WeddingWire registry to show on their wedding website. So we know when a user has clicked out to one of those retailers, and if they haven't actually followed through with importing into their WeddingWire registry. So we trigger this message to get them to complete that process. So again, it's kind of like the first message, sort of like cart abandonment, just applied to a different action. So the pitfall here, not following up with your hot prospects. So where are the holes in your funnel? So in your experience with your product, what are all the different interactions, and what are the holes where people are starting an action and not following through, and are you sending the message at the right time to get them back in that loop? So this message is sent to users who have submitted a lead to a caterer. It's offering some editorial about when you contact your caterer, what questions do you need to ask? It's actually one of a series. We also send follow-ups for venues and photographers. And one of the things about this message is we actually don't promote our vendor listings, and that's a very specific decision. They've already contacted vendors. We don't want to interfere with that conversation that we're having. but it's actually one of our top performing messages. So in spite of not having that direct call to action, we see high engagement because we're providing that value through the editorial. We actually see high conversion as well to the leads. So I think one of the things here that's important is this kind of message helps us maintain an engagement with subscribers, helps us keep them engaged because we're providing that value. So as you look across your program, we all have things that we need to ask for from our subscribers, but at what points are you offering value? And what opportunity do you have to give back to your subscriber in order to maintain that engagement? We send a message to all the users who have saved that vendor, and we also send a message to the users who have viewed that vendor in the last 14 days. Excuse me. User. So another reason to contact people with a message that's a little bit different. So this message is promoting hotels. Again, back to timing. So this is sent after a user has booked their venue, and we're showcasing hotels that are near the venue that they've booked. So this is a particular product where people can actually set up their guest accommodation. So this is actually accommodation. So this is actually, we see for the users that have told us which photographer we booked, that's really where we're seeing the conversion. We do send it to the rest of users as well. We see a little bit less interaction with that message. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to make this happen, talking about the data as well as getting the right people in place. So the first piece of data, and this has already come up today, is systems integration. I think this is one of the biggest challenges. We have a lot of different platforms in place. We're trying to get data from a lot of different systems. And it's actually been interesting. So I've been with Wedding Wire about 1.5 years. And in December, we actually merged with our biggest competitor, which is The Knot. And so the merger has actually gone really well, and it's been a fascinating opportunity to see how different businesses in the same industry with the same business model just do things differently. So on the Knot side, we actually have a variety of different marketing platforms that have API integrations directly into the marketing platform. So they're managing a number of different discrete data integrations. One of the advantages of this approach is the integration gives them more real-time data. One of the disadvantages is the data team has to manage all these separate API calls and maintain them over time. On the Wedding Wire side, we're actually doing those integrations to a data warehouse. And then the data warehouse is actually being used to output the data that we need for the marketing platform. And true confession time, most of that data is being passed with flat files delivered to an FTP server. And when I was thinking about this, I'm like, I don't want to tell anybody that. It should all be API calls. But we actually did a pretty extensive audit. We actually talked to an outside consultant. And for our particular setup, we're passing a pretty significant amount of data. Most of that data is only available once a day. And actually, the flat files are really just the better way to go. So we occasionally run into delays and things that create a snowball effect. But overall, the system actually works really well for us. So it sounds sort of outdated, but it works. I think in the end, we're going to end up with some hybrid. So there are some data points that we would like to have more real-time access to. We need to get API integrations in place for those data points. But I think a hybrid approach in the end is actually going to work really well. The other piece is data architecture and data integrity. So over the past year, our dev and product team actually did a lot of work on the back end. And one of the outcomes of that is actually a whole entirely new database. which meant all the data fields changed, the data tables changed. So we actually took that opportunity to audit all of our data that was being passed into the system, re-architected all of the tables. So we actually started, prior to that process, there were about 800 data points that were being passed on a daily basis. After we did our audit, we actually got that down to about 400 data points. And that was purely about reconsidering how the related tables were structured. So there was a lot of redundant data, a lot of things that we were able to use lookups for and use related tables for. So at the end of the day, we actually then added more data to it. So we came out of this process with more data than we had before. On a daily basis, we're passing about 570 data points. It includes the obvious stuff like email address and first name. But we're also passing things like, what is the last time that a user logged into the site? Have they downloaded the app, and which iOS did they use to download the app? When did they last log into the app? Those data points are spread across 40 tables, and then we're integrating those for 15 different countries. So the way we have our system set up is we use Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and it's split into what's called business units. So we've chosen to manage each country separately so that we can maintain a discrete database for each country. And then we're also able to share data across all those business units. So we've got a nice combination of discrete data and shared data. And one of the things for us, for some countries or some brands, like if you're something like Nike, you have the same brand across the world. For us, we actually have a different brand in every country. So it's the same back end. We can run the same programs, but it's actually a different brand. So this really helps us maintain that discrete database. Another thing about data architecture, something that we did in the audit was to standardize. So when you're looking at your field name, first name is not first name is not first. And this happens. This is the reality, right? Because as different people set up different things over time, they tend to set it up the way that is in their mind if there's not standards in place. So this can create a real issue. So what was happening for my team is when we were writing SQL queries, every time we wrote it, we had to look at the table to figure out how the data field was written for that particular table. So it's really a waste of time. So we went through and we standardized the field names. We standardized all the table names and all the file names. Another thing that we were running into is data types, so another place to standardize. So to give an example there, our user IDs, the unique ID for each customer, is a number. But we're not doing calculations with that number. We're using it as a string. And some people were putting it in as text, and some people were putting it in as a number. So then when we were writing our queries, all of a sudden we were getting errors because the data types didn't line up. So it's just another place that it's not necessarily top of mind until you run into the problem. So if you think about it up front and put those standards in place, it can save you a lot of time in the long run. And third, data quality. I already heard somebody say it today, garbage in, garbage out. I'm fortunate to be in a place where we have some good data hygiene practices in place. It's a big data company. But this is a huge issue for a lot of people. And if you don't have good quality data, then there's really nothing you can do with it. So what I encourage you to do is if you're in that situation, find a way to become a part of the conversations about when the data is collected. Let people know that email is a stakeholder in that data. The other aspect is the right people and the right teams. First being organizational buy-in. So I'm also very fortunate to be at a place where the organization believes in email as a channel. Our CMO knows the power of email, and it helps us get the resources that we need. One of the things that we do to help foster that buy-in is that we make sure when we're talking about metrics, we are aligned with the business goals. So we very rarely report things like open rate and click rate outside of the email team. So we have trained the organization to recognize those engagement metrics as health metrics. They're the things that the email team uses to diagnose problems with their underlying fundamental business goals. So we track, for example, leads. We track how many websites we're driving. We track how many registries people are starting. Those are the same metrics that the rest of the company is tracking. So I think that's a really important component to getting that organizational buy-in, because then you can really demonstrate how the channel is supporting the business. Secondly is strong networks. So we rely on a lot of other teams, obviously the data team. We're also relying on our creative team for graphics, for copy. We work with a number of different stakeholders across consumer marketing and e-commerce. So having those strong relationships allows us to have conversations about how to effectively use email. It gives us a voice in the conversation. So because of those networks, the email team is brought in at the beginning of a project to show how email can support it. So strong networks are really important. And third, well-rounded team. So there are a lot of different ways to successfully run an email team. One that I feel very passionately about is having a team that has both the technical skills as well as the marketing skills. And I really believe that because of the technical skills that my team has, they are better able to they do code HTML, they write SQL queries. They can also lay out a marketing program. So if they know what program they need to support and what the goal is, they can certainly lay out which messages and determine timing and things of that nature. So really a strong combination of technical skills and marketing skills. And when you're trying to build your team, I think one of the qualities that is really important is curiosity. So if you're hiring curious people, they're going to be interested in solving problems and looking at things new ways. And when things come out, they're going to be interested in chasing that because they're naturally curious. So to wrap things up, I am a list person, so I couldn't resist just wrapping up with a list. So a few things that you might want to consider doing once you get home. So one is auditing your customer journey. What are the different points along that journey that you can inject an email to get someone to take the next step? Think about the tone of your messaging. So we talked about copy that was unspecific, but also consider how do you make it personal. And authenticity is really becoming another buzzword in the marketing industry. And authenticity is difficult to maintain when you're talking about automation. So how do you use the tone of your messaging to be personal and authentic? Make a plan for communicating with dormant users. So for most businesses, it's a really big segment. It's too big to ignore. There is value there. So what are you doing to figure out how to communicate with those users? Fully use the features and tools included with your platform. So particularly if you are on a platform that has regular releases, and the busyness of day-to-day, it can be really easy to, you see it, it's like, well, I'll get to it later. But make sure that you're really using all the functionality that you have. And find those curious team members and give them an opportunity to explore something and present it to your team. So review your data structure. A lot of inefficiencies, a lot of time wasted can happen if your data architecture is not good. So really re-examine your data architecture and see if there are places that you need to standardize or re-architect. And last, build your team's skill set and seek out curious people. There's people who are going to solve problems and figure out different ways to do things. So thank you so much for letting me share with you today, and thank you for bearing with my voice.
Heather, thank you. That was great. Thank you so much. I'm gonna spare this poor woman's voice. She's done yeoman's work. She's going to be running the roundtable at the end of the morning. So if you have follow-up questions for Heather, you can save it for then, and we'll give her voice a little bit of a rest. Heather, thanks again. That was great. We are going to round out. We seem to be on a roll talking about very personal data. For those of you who are golfers, you know that the core of your game, the details of your game, are about as personal as they get. But how, for a golf equipment and services provider, how do you best use that data in a sensitive and useful way? And again, turn the data that you're able to collect from users into enhanced experiences, not just ticking off another box of personalized messaging. So to tell us the ways in which TaylorMade Golf is doing this, we have the VP of Digital and Direct-to-Consumer, John Gonsalves. He is in charge of creating that digital experience and using the data to craft the ways in which TaylorMade Golf becomes more than simply a service and an equipment brand, but in fact a kind of golf buddy. So please welcome John Gonsalves.
Thanks, Steve. So my first Email Insider Summit, surprised it's my first after hearing about all the locations you guys have these things in. I'm more of an email outsider, so it's not my day-to-day job. It's part of my team's job, but I have a lot of kind of thoughts around how we operate this part of the business. So it's US Open Week, which is a big deal for us in our company. It's a big deal in golf. How many golfers are in the room today? Awesome. How many people are playing today? Cool. On the screen, you've got 6 of our athletes up there. I'm going to give away a driver today. I'm going to ask a question. Who can tell me how many major championships these guys combined account for? Close.
28, 43, 49.
Getting closer.
56.
Who said 20? Who said 25? Who said less than 25? What did you say?
24. 18.
You in the back.
22. 21.
Who said 21? Winner. 21. I know, it's a bit of a guess. Tiger won 15 of them, so it's a little bit, you gotta add it up. Come find me afterwards. I don't have it in my pocket or on me, but you got a TaylorMade driver coming your way. For a little bit about the company, a little history quick of TaylorMade Golf Company. We've been around since 1979. This is our 40th anniversary. The company was founded by a golf salesman named Gary Adams in 1979. Prior to 1979, every club, every wood was made of wood. And if you look around the pictures of walking around Pinehurst today, you're going to see a lot of wooden clubs. In 1979, Gary had an idea of making a club out of metal, perimeter weighting, filling it with foam, ball flies higher, more forgiving. Long story short, it won on the PGA Tour in 1981. 1993 was the last time anyone had won a professional major with a wooden wood, and since then everything has been made of metal. But that's kind of where we started. So thinking about things differently, changing the way that the game is viewed, constantly innovating, that's what our brand was built around. And today, and kind of what we live every day, is to be the best performance golf brand in the world. That's what we strive to. It's what we focus our energy on, whether it's drivers or irons or golf balls or putters, accessories, so on and so forth. We have, as you saw up there, some of the best players in the world play our equipment. We're very proud of that. Tiger Woods, obviously moving to our equipment a couple years ago. He grew up playing our equipment before Nike paid him to do so. But we're relentlessly focused on innovation and thinking of things better. And for those of you that are golfers in this room, if you golf bug at some point of your passion for the game. And so this is just a little video that kind of
from here together, you're going to.
We saw that we're going to have to aim our swing to the right so that the club that,
So keep in mind that
the top, you turn, you don't shift.
that couldn't be further from
Not turn, it's turn.
pull the strap underneath and you're ready to go.
Move to the right. will move
And now your brain is working against you.
Feels right is actually wrong. Feels wrong is actually
You need to get a new thought process of visual images, pictures, or nouns.
Okay,
All right, I'm in control of my thoughts.
brain resists.
Here in the head.
Your brain's no, why? Don't do
It's
that.
really a no-brainer.
Next to impossible.
This thought is not real.
You want to have a yes mindset.
and then I promise.
You'll understand how it all fits together.
Crazy golfers are, right? Like, you've done some of those things. You've watched some of those videos. So just kind of keep about data, and this isn't going to be real dive into email, but I think for us it's a viewpoint on data and data in sports. And so you look at how data, baseball is a great example of data has changed the way that you view players. There's no longer an argument about who is the best shortstop today. Stats and data that will tell you definitively this guy's the best because his VORP or his win. So there's all kind of stats that baseball is using. Basketball has used it. It's changed the way that the game is played. The Warriors in the three-point shot, and the fact that there is no such thing as a mid-range shooter anymore, because data says it's better to take a lot of three-point shots and miss those than a bunch of two-point shots and miss those. But the reality is, golf actually has the most potential for data. And the conference called the MIT Sports Conference, where all the data geeks around sports get together. And this isn't my quote, I wish it was, but on a scale of 1 to 10, golf is an 11 on the potential for this data. And you think about it, the ball doesn't move. It's just you and the golf course. There are no variables. There's no batter and other things that are kind of getting in the way or defender. And so we're just getting started with golf and the use of data. But the potential is massive. We see it in the world and on tour. And the way we kind of think of it as a brand, there are 56 million golfers around the world. And if you actually start to think about Top Golf and kind of the recreational things like that, that number is much higher. But we look at the core golfer, there's 56 million golfers around the world. And if we can understand more about what they're playing with, where they're playing, when, how, who they're playing with, and what their stats, their trends, their scores are, that we can give them insights to help them become a better golfer, to improve their game. And if we can fulfill on that, we've created brand loyalists. So that's kind of how we view what data can do for us. The problem is deconstructing all this data and finding out all the points that we can utilize. There's a lot of it out there. We have different streams of it. We have it across all kind of parts of the organization. Everyone will talk about that today and has talked about it. How do you synthesize it, get it all in one place, make it useful? And that's kind of the challenge that we're currently facing. We have, we're a wholesale brand generally. The gentleman from Fender talked about it today. I mean, we still do the majority of our business via wholesale through golf pro shops like the one here, or large big box sporting goods retailers like Dick's Sporting Goods. But we've built a significant e-commerce business, and so we have this first-party data that, the normal stuff that we're doing. We can see what you're buying, what you're shopping for, what you may be in the market for. We get a lot of self-select data that if you go to configure a club custom, we can start to discern your level, what type of player you are, whether you want a stiff shaft, an extra stiff shaft, you're looking for other componentry, we can get information there, all your basic purchase behavior. So all of these things, site metrics, we're taking this and we're doing things with this data. Then we have a fitting. If anyone's gone to a fitting, whether it's with us or another vendor, to get fitted for golf clubs, there's a lot of really, really rich data that we can use to help you play better golf. You go to a fitting, we put you on a launch monitor, which has radar and can determine the spin rates of the ball, the launch angles, all these conditions, club head speed. And we take all that data and we have millions and millions of swings with all of this data around it. And it's very, very rich data. So we've got this and we know that about you, but it's just for what you're doing at that particular moment in time for a fitting. The real interesting part that we're trying to figure out is on-course data. What happens out in the wild? Once you've gone to a fitting, once you've hit something in a net, what actually happens when you go on the golf course and play? What are you doing? What clubs are you using to do it? How many times are you actually hitting a 5-wood? Or how many times are you hitting a 4-iron? What happens to that driver that you were perfectly fit for when you go out in the golf course and actually start to use it? So where are you using it? What clubs are in your bag? How far are you hitting your driver? What are your tendencies? Are you hitting a lot left? Are you hitting a lot to the right? Are you coming up short on your approach shots? How many putts per round do you have? All those kind of things. And they really culminate in the stat called strokes gained. So if any of you guys watch golf on the weekends, you start to see this a lot on tour. They're talking about it. It's a statistic that allows you to really compare yourself and your performance on every shot relative to a competition set, whether it's the PGA Tour, a scratch golfer, a 5 handicap, a 10 handicap, so on and so forth. So we've developed an app is one way we're kind of starting to do this. We've had forms of this app that some of our top players have been using, the underpinning data set around this. We've used it with a lot of colleges and universities to help you really keep a log of your rounds. So you go out and you play around. We track all of your shots around the golf course, how far you hit them, where they landed, position, and a lie condition, which is important. So if you're in the fairway at 250 yards, or you're in a bunker, or in the rough at 250 yards, those are 3 different outcomes. And so we need to know where you hit it, where it landed, what the next shot was, how far you were. Detailed yardages, you can get GPS yardages on the course, and you can start to identify areas for improvement in your golf game. And what it really comes out is these in-depth stats. So immediately following your round, if you've done this in-round, you can do it in-round or afterwards. A lot of people still do it afterwards because the data is really important, but they don't want to be bothered in the course of your game. We present a summary of traditional stats, and the traditional stats would be fairways hit, greens in regulation, number of putts, things like that. But then we start to look at strokes gained by segment. So your driving game, your approach game, your short game, and putting. And we can start to break down how are each of those different parts of your game performing. And we can have things like dispersion graphs. Start to look at all your drives during a round or over time. We can plot them on a graph and show you visually what is happening with your round, and then give you insights around that. What should I be doing because of that result? And through this, we have about 100,000 users that are interacting with this app. We've captured 3+ million holes played with 14, 15 million shots. And so you imagine the amount of data we have with a couple million fittings, 15 million shots here. What do we do with all that stuff? 900,000 clubs logged. I heard someone say, and you're talking about, ask people, they will opt in. They will give you information if there's useful stuff coming out of it. So people will log make and model of all the clubs they have in their bag, not just tailor-made clubs, but whatever else is in their bag. They can start to look at how each of those clubs are performing against each other. So, how do we execute this? And the challenge for us is having the right tools to deliver this information. It's being able to deliver the right emails, the right messaging, whether it's push messaging, finding the user where they are at the right point in time, the right message at the right time, contextually delivering something useful to you about your golf game. That requires a lot of different understanding of what the data is. It requires a lot of different creative. So contextual creative, everybody's going to have a little bit of a different result, and being able to deliver a message that is relevant for what your game is, whether it's you're driving the ball really well, but you're coming up short in all your approach shots, so here's something about your iron game. And then giving you prescriptive information about what should I do. Everything is coming up short and right. Maybe you're not striking your irons as well as you should. Here are some video lessons around ball striking. That's the useful insights, right? So you wouldn't go out today and go for a run. Any of these are runners. I'd be hard-pressed to find someone. I just go out and run. I don't know how far I'm going. I don't know how fast I'm going or what my pace is. I just run, and then I stop, and I'm done. That doesn't happen anymore. But in golf, it quite Frankly, it does. There's a score, you kind of kept the score, and then you say, oh, I played really well, I putted horribly. The reality is you probably didn't putt horribly. You maybe missed a bunch of greens, and that caused you to be farther from the pin or things like that. So actually what you think is happening, sometimes the data will tell you actually isn't what your result is. Guys, college golfers, example, he'll come back and he says, Coach, oh, Coach, I putted great today, I killed it. He's like, no, you didn't. You missed all the greens, and therefore you chipped up and you had 4-footers and you made a bunch of those. You didn't hit any greens versus a guy who hit a bunch of greens and was 20 feet away and made a bunch of birdies. It's not always the result that you think it is. So, what we started with is kind of this basics. There's a lot of data, a lot of things we can push to you, but what we started with was the basics, a welcome series. When you download the app, there's a welcome to the app, some how-tos of how to use it, and then just basic summaries of what's going on in your round. And so for most golfers, that's actually something they don't have access to today. The responses to those are very high, even though it's just basic information. Here's the round you played. Here's a summary of your round. Here's your stat summary. A little bit about your profile as a golfer. And you can start to build that and compare it against another data set. And then what we're really trying to focus on are these performance-based metrics, the results-driven stuff. That's where the insight and the real meat is for us. But as you can imagine, it's pretty difficult to try and distill everybody's shots and give you real personalized information based off the data we have. What should I be telling you? Because most of us as golfers need to work on more than one thing. It's probably all aspects of your game. So how do we prioritize what messages we're sending you? Whether it's driving stats, your short game, your approaches, what are the trends in your game, and then really starting to compare. Golfers in here, you want to know how you're doing against your foursome, against the guys at your club, other people that you play with. Just understanding what your comparison. So you can compare yourself to a PGA Tour player, like I like to do, and it's not very pretty. So I kind of back it down to a scratch golfer or a 5 handicap player. Feel a little bit better about myself, but that's more of my relative competitive set, and I can start to look at my stats against those players. And then the actions piece, again, this is a bit aspirational for us, but I think going back to that 54 million golfers, understanding more and more about them, if I start to look at your rounds and I can really discern, here's what David's doing, and here's where his ball's going, here's how he hits his driver, here's how he's performing in a short game. Maybe he needs a new putter because he's just not, relative to his competitive set, is not putting very well, so let's recommend him a new putter. Or we notice you had 3 balls that went into the water or 3 penalty strokes in your last round. You continually are losing golf balls, and we can note that in the app. Maybe we should send you some new balls. Or you put the new TaylorMade driver in your bag because you won a contest that the guy just decided to throw up at the beginning of a presentation, and now I can see that I'm driving the ball 15 yards longer than my competitors. And so those are the things that we, I can't say that we're there yet, but aspirationally, that's what we know we can do with this data. We know it's useful for the golfer. But really to start to deliver on this is taking a bigger team, more folks to really get into the data and understanding it. So to the resourcing aspect, and I don't have 6 resources on our email team that are able to deliver this. Aspirationally, we think we're going to get there. But we're already running multiple programs, all of our e-commerce programs. Anthony, we do have a loyalty program that we launched and are messaging a lot around that. If you book a fitting with us or go to a Kingdom or go to one of our events, there's a series of email triggers around that. We have club upgrade programs that have 15 plus messages around that. So the same team that's doing all of those things is now tasked with figuring out how to deliver this rich data experience. So you can imagine there's a lot of challenges with that. So we know email is important. We can run all the ROI on it. We're actually seeing a lot of offline effects from email. While we do have mostly third-party data that we are looking at, and 90% of our business is done at wholesale trade partners, we can see the effect of email when it comes to sell-through at retail. Similar to TV commercials that we run on Saturdays and Sundays during events and stuff on the Golf Channel, email is actually almost as effective as some of those programs. So we need to prove it out. And it's not just an ROI. This is a bit of a long-term play for us, because to really get to this journey and to deliver this consumer data, we need to prove out not just some of the stats, the click-through rates and the ROI, but we know it's a much more valuable customer that uses this information. So the LTV of this customer is twice a normal customer. They're just more engaged, the more intent to buy our products. So these are just a couple examples creatively of some of the messaging. So you've got a welcome series that we do, and then we're populating all of these emails with your individual stats. And so here's a round summary, which you'll get kind of your strokes gained by segment, and you'll start to get some distances and things. And then you've got a longer term summary, which may be a year-to-date summary, or a history of since the time you've been using the app. And then some other kind of milestone things. So we're populating a lot of this data. We just moved to responses, or to eMarsis from responses. Allowed us to be a little bit more nimble with pulling in this data, populating these emails without having to do as much manual work. And so just kind of the lessons for us is, like, don't take the data for granted. We've all talked about it. A number of things we've learned is there's always outliers in this data, so we can't always trust it. There's always a 725-yard drive in someone's thing because a shot didn't get logged properly, or that 7-iron that you topped and hit 15 yards has got to be thrown out. So we've done a lot of work making sure that the data is clean and that we're normalizing it. But it's also just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it. There's a lot of stuff in there that we could throw at you, but it's a little much. And so finding the things that we should do, not just the can do. Automation is still manual for us. So no matter how much we try to automate this, no matter how much we pull that data into the systems, there's still a layer of we as golfers, we as marketers need to look at this and say, does this actually make sense? I know we have the data to tell this story, but does it really make sense? So there's still a layer of people touching all of these programs at some point to make sure that they're contextual. And my team, we always say it's automated, but at the end of the day, there's always someone still touching it. And for us, we always talk about we don't have a lack of ideas. We're great with ideas. That's not the problem. It's really how do you execute on the ideas? What are the things that really need to be focused on? What are the small wins? What are the things that we can build on that allow us to kind of get to the next step? And so, for us, ideas are not the problem. And I think the kind of theme around all of this, TaylorMade, we do presentations, we always have to show 1 or 2 videos, so I'm going to do one more video. But ideas aren't the problem, and we're never done. I think all of this stuff is a continual process of learning, evolving. We're very, very new in the space. All of us in here, we talk about data, but we've just scratched the surface. I think everyone will kind of hit on that in a presentation. But for us, it actually lines up with one of the things we talk about as a brand, relentless pursuit of perfection. We are never done. And in this data space, I just kind of felt like it was relevant that, as a brand, we are just beginning and we are never done.
Man, that was not even close, Rory.
He's stunned, and I think everybody watching.
I just do not like the game right now. I mean, I'm just having a very, very hard time picking up the golf club to even just enjoy myself out there.
And then to do this right here. There's always times you can say, what if?
What I'm talking about is a game that can't.
That's all right, Francis. Even in our darkest hour, we must always remember, never care.
The first step in finding a game is to find some conviction.
We're looking for...
Let me tell you something. I came here to win a trophy.
Expect anything different?
Not for you, not for England, but for sheer bloody pride at being the best. That's why we do this.
You're never going to be perfect. You're going to miss shots. You're going to make bad swings. I try to do my very best with many other shots.
Thank you.
Other than, you know, how to play your game.
It's Anthony from eMarsis again, and as you learned a few minutes ago, eMarsis is partnering with TaylorMade, not to make a commercial, but it's for me as a golfer, it's been incredible. These guys are awesome, do a lot of really cool stuff. But my question is, I'm curious with Myron Pro, what profile of handicap is interacting with it the most?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, as I said at the beginning, your handicap isn't really indicative of your level of passion in the sport. And I think I've been with the company 8 years, and when I first got there, we didn't really know a lot about our customer, and we just assumed that a low handicap golfer is the most engaged golfer out there. And it's actually couldn't be further from the truth. So in that app, it's actually a mid double-digit handicapper, so a 10 to 14 handicap is the most engaged group. Which when we tell people that within the company, they're rather surprised because you think it's the better player, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5 handicapper that is trying to get better, but it's really that guy who's a 10, 14 handicap who wants to get down to a single-digit handicap is the meat of that golfer today. But it started from tour and better amateurs, college players really getting into the data, but it applies to anyone. If I only have a half hour to practice during the week because I have a job and kids and other things, tell me the one thing I should spend a half hour on. Most people would just go to the driving range and hit drivers. It's probably the last thing you need to work on. So if we can give you insights around that, say, go work on 50 to 70-yard pitch shots. That's what you should spend your 30 minutes on. That's really useful.
Are you doing anything to lessen your reliance on user input and that level of input? Are you able to take some of the data you're getting from, say, that's 100,000 who are actively giving you that kind of level of detail and extrapolate from there, do lookalike modeling so that you're able to take action on that kind of data to profile other golfers who aren't interacting with you this way?
Yeah, I mean, we can, again, the only way we were able to tell handicap or golfers before was by handicap. You're a 7 and you're a 7, you guys must be exactly alike, and that's not the case. And so we can start to really build segments around performance, where you might have people that drive the ball really far but are poor in short game. And that profile may come up, and we can start to look at those people together. And we also pull in a bunch of other data. If we pull in fitting data and these other things, we can start to build real unique profiles that are going to help us create lookalikes for here's the type of club you should be playing, here's the shaft particularly you should be using, because I know that based off all this other data I have on golfers like you, this is what they play and do. So we're inferring a lot from that data.
And then finally, since you mentioned you're playing the long game here, tell me about the sort of brand metrics you're looking to move ultimately. With this kind of, using this kind of, you're essentially talking about the kind of relationship you're having with golfers. So I'm curious what kind of brand KPIs you're looking at, or in terms of just changing the whole brand image and messaging.
Yeah.
The same as that.
It's share of bag for us. So you got 14 clubs in your bag and a golf ball. And so for us, it's share of bag. Our history as a metalwood company, we sold metalwoods and did that very well for a long period of time. We are one of the number one iron company in golf, give or take on a given day. But categories like wedges and putters and golf ball, where we have a lot of opportunity, is kind of what we're looking at. So we want you to have 14 TaylorMade golf clubs in your bag and play a TaylorMade golf ball. But that's not the reality of golfers today.
Hi, my name is Mitch Wagaman. I'm with eDataSource.
Hey, Mitch.
And I know there's devices out there that you can put in the grip of your club or other things like that to provide additional measurement or feedback. My perception is a lot of very traditional, those low handicap golfers don't want those things associated with the club. Is there any research or anything coming down the road that gives you the data without the impedance in the perspective of the golfer?
Yeah, there are things out there. There are ways to capture that more passively, and we're looking at those. And there are things in market. But to your point, yeah, there are some people. They're a little obtrusive on the equipment today. They're becoming more seamless. But we see a day where this would just. It's going to be part of every piece of equipment at some point. And so the app allows you to kind of do your own experience. Again, like I said, a lot of people actually do it afterwards, where you kind of know where all your shots were. So I think we look at it 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. I think all equipment's going to have electronics on board in some way, shape, or form, and not be obtrusive.
John, I imagine that you're going to be as valuable out on the links over the next couple of days as you were on stage, which is great. So. John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have, John, do we have any announcements before we go to roundtables? Okay. We have 3 roundtables this morning. First is leveraging loyalty with Bridget Darling, who's our old friend from Adobe. She's the product marketing manager at Adobe. Bridget, where are you? There you are. And where is leveraging loyalty table? Somebody tell me where the sign is.
Here's what I found.
It's here. Okay. The light's in my eye, and I'm blind anyway. Data-driven messaging with John Consalvis is going to be back there where Maya's waving in the corner. And then personalization at scale with Heather is going to be right there. So grab a round table.
It's a death row pardon, 2 minutes too late, and isn't it ironic?